Essentially, you're looking at non-native society viewing the land as means of making money, to exploit it, taking the natural resources out of it, the oil and gas, the gold, the potash, even to the point of planting fields on it, right? So this is another picture of Palmaker. This is Palmaker Hill. This is essentially the route where Colonel Otter came up to attack us in 1885. So again, another story that ties us to place, another story that ties us to the land base, that ties me to the land base. This is actually the approach to my house. So I grew up on this hill. I grew up where this battle took place. Again, hitting home the fact that for Indigenous people, the most essential value becomes the most concrete, which is the land. Because the land is where we derive our culture. The land is where we derive our dignity. The land is where we derive our food. Traditionally, we ate off the land, right? So keep that in mind as we go along this presentation and hopefully take into account some of the issues we're facing in terms of land and resources. So the reality is, in terms of me doing this research, I realized that there's some challenges that we're facing. There's some challenges coming down the pipeline where we're not going to essentially have access to clean water in some of our communities. We already don't have access to clean water in some of our communities. But Mother Earth and nature is starting to take these steps. There's going to be drastic changes. In context to the Saskatchewan River, north and south, we need to elaborate and we need to look wider in terms of where the water is coming from. The majority of the water that's in Prince Albert, the majority of the water that's in Saskatoon and Regina comes directly from the Saskatchewan River. Right? So when people think, oh, we not need to conserve water, we need to be aware of water, they're looking at the Saskatchewan rivers, right? However, the reality is that the majority of the runoff, the majority of that water comes from the Rocky Mountains. So when we're paying attention to climate change, when we're paying attention to the water issues and water quality issues, we gotta look beyond what's in front of us. We gotta look at it from a world perspective, what's going on in the world. So when we look at the Rocky Mountains and we're realizing, hey, climate change, the earth is warming up, right? Which is one of those prophecies, the earth is gonna warm up and become hotter and warmer. It's altering and messing with the snow caps, right? With the snow on top of the mountains, which feeds the Saskatchewan River, right? So that's really concerning because when you're looking at the development, the oil and gas development, a lot of the industrial development, it's causing climate change, right? It's causing climate change, which is causing the earth to warm up and become hotter, which is causing these snow caps to melt faster, and they're melting so fast and the earth is so warm that they can't replenish themselves, which means they can't feed the river systems, which means that the water levels of the Saskatchewan rivers are going to go down, right? Go down in the next couple generations here. So we need to take that into consideration, is that when we're looking at the water and the water issues, we also got to come at it from a global perspective. An example of that is that in 1997, Bangladesh, a country next to India, on the other side of the world, developed a plan where they actually wanted to provide fresh running water to a lot of rural people, a lot of farmers in the country. And so they came together and they said, okay, let's build these water wells, right? Let's build these water wells to supply water to 70 million people in Bangladesh. That was their quota and they met it. There's a lot of people in those countries. So they said, how do we do it cost effectively? Right? How do we supply clean drinking water to these people and not go bankrupt doing it? So when they did it, they sort of cheaped out and they bought some water wells, water tubes that they put into the ground that weren't the best quality, that weren't the highest standard, and they distributed them across the real populations and they put them into effect and people started drinking the water, not realizing that those water wells, those water tubes that they planted were contaminated with arsenic. So there was a high increase, and there is a high increase of arsenic poisoning in Bangladesh. Right? What does that have to do with over here, right? That's another part of the world. However, now a lot of scientists and biologists are looking internationally at water sources in North America, in Europe, even in Australia. And they're starting to find traces of arsenic that weren't there 10 years ago. Does that make sense? So how something happened in this country where they planted these hydrological systems, these water wells, essentially essentially made its way into the global water table, they call it. How everything's interconnected. We have that concept in our way of life, right? Everything's related. Everything's interconnected. Which means that it went into the groundwater. It went into the hydrological system where the water evaporates, goes into the clouds, goes across the world, and drops in somewhere else, right? And it goes and starts all over again. What that means is that when you go to certain lakes and rivers, they're finding arsenic in those rivers that weren't there before. And it's a bit higher. I mean, it's a minute amount, and it's hard to say that that arsenic came from Bangladesh. However, there's more arsenic in the world in the water system than there was 10 years ago. And this plan, this infrastructure plan to provide clean drinking water to 70 million people, essentially polluted the land and polluted the people, where a lot of them actually are dying from arsenic poisoning. It's in their blood, it's in their systems, and essentially the world. Right? So that's a challenge to overcome, because now in other parts of the world we say, well, how do we deal with the arsenic poisoning that we didn't create? And that's one of the big loopholes in governance, is they can't effectively deal with climate change, they can't effectively deal with pollution because of the governance systems in place. Where Canada is not responsible for the United States, the United States isn't responsible for Canada, but if the United States decided to do a big multi-billion-dollar project that polluted Canada, how are they going to go about it? Does that make sense? How some of those issues are sort of also international that we face on the ground as grassroots people. So that's what I mean by everything being interconnected, and how we also need to take into account